Welcome to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast where we explore all things theology and therapy. I'm your host, Grace Brown, registered psychotherapist with Journey with Grace Counseling Services, also certified Canadian counselor.
And I'm Brad Watson, author and pastor of Nexus Church. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa. Good morning, Grace. Here we are with another episode of The Sacred Sofa. Good to see you.
You too, Brad. Good morning to you.
Yes, we have been diving into a lot of relational stuff as of late. We have been spending time on marriage and long-term romantic relationships there, Grace. But this morning we're going to shift gears a little bit and think about friendship, how we can improve upon them, some ways to think about them. So how can we be better friends, and what are the ingredients maybe that make for strong and healthy friendships? So I think what we'll do, Grace, is as we did for marriage, we'll put friendship on a ladder, so to speak. So Grace, I thought what I would do is I'd start with two maybe interesting thought experiments or things for you to reflect on. I'm curious about this. I want to start with three quotes, see what you think of them, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'm just excited about this topic is all health relationships. So let's get into the friendship on a ladder.
Okay, well, I got three quotes to start. So the first one is from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I think I'm pronouncing that somewhat right. He says this: "Tell me with whom you consort with, and I will tell you who you are." And then Ryan Holiday says, "The people we surround ourselves with help set the baseline for what we think is okay, what we think is possible, and what we're exposed to." And then the one I'm most interested in, Jim Rohn says, "You are the average of the 5 friends you spend the most time with." Now, that had me really thinking. So, Grace, I was wondering for you, consider the 5 friends you spend the most time with, and if you can conjure up a word or phrase that sums them up best, consider that you're the average of those 5 people and how you would describe them. I'm curious, how does that make you feel? Does that make you feel good or bad? Could you reflect on that a little for me?
You know what? I really like these quotes because it creates an opportunity for not only self-reflection, but as well a friendship audit. That's what I'm going to call it, a friendship audit. And along with Von Gogh, my mom used to say, "Show me your company, I'll tell you who you are." You know, in her strong Jamaican accent. "Show me your company, I'll tell you who you are." And
that's great. I
think that's actually true. So as I've cultivated friendships over the years of my life, I feel like I'm in a really good place. I was thinking of different qualities of my baseline friendships: caring, welcoming, supportive, genuine. And I'm grateful. I feel really good about them. And honestly, Brad, this has been a lifetime of curating a village to support me on this journey of life. So I've been very intentional about who I surround myself with. And of course, I continue to do a bit of spring cleaning as we go because relationships aren't static.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a fun experiment, and I was doing a little inventory as well, and it's funny because you get to know people well. So for instance, I jotted down some terms to describe my friendships. One of them was, "Hey, I find this friend incredibly charming, humorous, but they can be a little bit aloof at times." And you start to go, I wonder if that applies to me too. So it's a fun experiment, I think, to look at our friends' faults and attributes and go, I wonder where I sit in that. So for that reason alone, I think it's a fun inventory to do. But like you, I'm very grateful for my close friends, and absolutely. So this is fun to talk about. But the second thing I wanted to ask you about is, I sent you a graph. I know listeners won't be able to see it, but I can describe it very well. Is I came across it in some research. It's just on average how many hours we spend a day with our friends over the course of our lifetime. And the graph is just remarkable to me because we tend to peak at around the age of 18, spending almost 3 hours a day with friends. So it goes 15, rises up to 18, and then it's like this steep cliff drop off between 18 and 36, where that drops to less than an hour a day. And That sort of makes sense to me because, your 20s, your early 30s, you're getting into career, maybe starting a family. So that makes sense to me. But what was, I think, most shocking to me,
Hmm,
Grace, about this is that once you sort of hit that 36 age, the graph never goes back up. We generally spend less than an hour a day with
hmm,
our friends all the way till we're 85, which is where the graph stops. So we
interesting.
tend to spend so much of our early formative years with friends. As family comes in the picture, it drops off, but it never picks back up. And I'm curious about that because you would think as you go through life, as the kids get older, maybe you're more financially independent or less career driven, who knows. I would have thought maybe the graph, the amount of time we spend with friends, would go up, but it doesn't.
Mhm.
And I'm curious maybe what you think are the reasons for that. What would you attribute that to?
This is very curious indeed. And I've been
Mm,
looking at this graph and pondering it. And I think it there's a couple of things that I'm curious about. One is, was this study done with separate genders? Because I feel like that would be a factor, right? In
interesting.
terms
You're
of how we're
right.
socialized, binary in terms of men and women. So I think that might
Mm,
affect the graph. I do believe there's something to be said about socialization and how we're geared and programmed. I think there's a lot to unpack in this graph. In the little time that we have, I think we can
yes.
also consider seasons of life changes would
Mm,
factor in here. So, like you said,
mhm.
early on in your 18s to 20s, there's a lot of formative. If you're going to post secondary education, right? That's a
Right.
melting pot of meeting different people and creating
Yep.
new connections, that sort of thing. And then things, sort of stabilize in your 30s. And then I'm thinking about seasons of life, not only in terms of career, but in terms of identity that changes. Some of those things are going to lessen because it means our identity has changed. So, for example, I'm thinking of grief, spouses
Mm,
who are now single. That could be
mm,
relationship breakdowns, that could be a death of a spouse or partner. And, if your identity was as a couple, that's going to drastically shift, right?
right.
And so, what are the connections then? Yeah, so there's a lot here. There's a lot here
Yeah.
too that we could
No,
potentially explore more on.
do you think any of it is grace? When you're 18, you love being out, being with people. Is there something, do you think, about the older we get, the harder it is to make new friends? Is that just a myth, do you think?
I think it can be harder. Like I said, like let's say you're doing post-secondary education, college or
Mm,
university. Like that's thousands of different people. Well, depending on how
yeah.
large
Yeah.
your school
Yes.
is, but that's hundreds of people that you're mingling with.
Mm,
Creating an opportunity to connect with so many different people. You
right.
know, unless you're working in a huge um, job
Mm,
organization, again, it's going to limit the time and ability to meet certain people.
right.
People make the best connections organically.
Mm,
Similar thoughts, beliefs, interests, activities. That's where we make the most connections. And so,
mm,
if a lot of those things are staying stagnant or static, it's not going to create variety.
right.
And also to your point, who we were in our 20s versus who we are in our 40s, 50s, like all of that also changes. And so,
Yeah.
we would kind of look side eye at a 60-year-old at the club, versus a 20-year-old
Yeah.
at a club. Like just
Right.
certain things are expected to change and be different. And
Mm,
I think there's a space for grief, but also a radical acceptance of life is supposed to change. We're supposed to grow and evolve and change. And hopefully, in each season of our life, we can cultivate some of those really strong friendships that continue to shape who we are.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I believe we're profoundly shaped by our friends, and yet some folks do have a more difficult time forming or keeping friendships as we get older. Maybe it makes sense to take a step back or so, Brad, and let's try to define what friendship is. How would you define friendship?
Yeah, you know what? I think that's important because it's easy to sort of just assume we know. So I'll work off of a passage from Jesus here. You could find any quote on friendship you want, but I think there's something interesting about what Jesus does here
Mhm.
in the book of John. To start, I would say I think a friendship, I think for the most part at least, is a platonic relationship, and I think that's part of actually what makes friendship so wonderful. You know, we've just come out of talking about relationships and the complications of sex, and you know how that, you know, it just adds an element to a relationship that can be
Mhm.
hard to navigate. So a platonic relationship can be wonderful because that complicating factor is just off the table. So
Mhm.
that's nice.
Mhm.
So I would say, okay, a platonic relationship then marked by a few things. So John 15, Jesus says, no one has a greater love than this, than to lay down your life for your friends. So I would start by saying, okay, it's a person, a friend we commit to love, including the willingness to sacrifice for them and provide service for them when necessary. Now, Jesus
Mhm.
goes to the extreme. Who are you willing to give your life up for? But I think we all understand this in a ton of ways. You have a friend when it's moving day, you're moving
Ah.
houses. Who's showing up on moving day, right? That's a sacrifice. And I got to be honest, as I get older, I really hope my friends just hire movers.
You're just
I
like,
don't
I'll
have to.
provide you with some cash to help.
Exactly. If you'll spare my back from moving there, right? So, but I think the people that we're willing to actually sacrifice ourselves for in some capacity, those are friends.
Mhm.
So, friendship has an element of that in that. And then Jesus, speaking to his followers, talks about how he doesn't call them servants any longer. And I think that's actually really important because a friendship is defined by a lack of hierarchy.
Mhm.
And of course, that's what we want in, say, a romantic relationship as well. But I think we're used to a lot of hierarchy relationships. Anyone who
Mhm.
works probably finds themselves in the chain somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Top,
Mhm.
bottom, somewhere in between. And even parents, children, there can be a baked
Yes.
in hierarchy a bit there, at least for a time. So
Mhm.
I think that's an important factor. So someone we're willing to sacrifice for, but someone we don't sense at least an immediate hierarchy. It's really is truly level playing field. And then Jesus goes on to say his disciples, I've called you friends because I've let you know everything. And I think that's important as well. What he's talking about is a relationship of intimacy. So
Mhm.
the people that we let inside, and this is what would mark a friend different than an acquaintance. We're not going to share intimate details of our lives or our emotional landscape. But a
Mhm.
friendship, then, that's how I define it. Someone we're willing to make a sacrifice for, a relationship without hierarchy, and then a relationship of some kind of intimacy. What about you, Grace? How would you define friendship?
That's a really strong definition, Brad. And I can think of many characteristics to go along with each of the traits that you've identified. And I'm
Mm.
sure we'll explore more, but that's a really strong foundation for
Mm.
which us we
Hmm.
can start. So we've got a handle on what a friend is. What is it
Mm.
about friendship that makes it such a gift in our lives and allows it to be such a powerful shaper in our lives?
Yeah, this has been a bit of a revelation for me that our friendship shape us, right? Like all good
Mhm.
friends will shape us. But I came across some stuff from C.S. Lewis that just
Mhm.
really struck me. And he talks about how great friends actually call us as our in our personhood, call us into existence. And the way he sort of stumbled upon this, he tells the story of, for those familiar with Lord of the Rings, C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis, J.R.
Mhm.
Tolkien, they had their little writing group, the Inklings, right? And there was about 8 of them in total. And C.S. Lewis reflected that one of the members died,
Mhm.
and he reflected that Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings, had stopped laughing in a certain way since this person had passed away. And him
Mhm.
reflecting on how, wow, that person's sense of humor seemed to bring out a particular aspect of Tolkien that only he could bring out. And so
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis goes on to say, in each of my friends, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, I'm not large enough to call the whole of myself into activity. I want other lights than my own to show all my facets. And so I think there's something
Beautiful.
very beautiful about, there's a part of us maybe that doesn't come into existence until certain friends call it into existence. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a stronger reason to pursue healthy, strong friendships than knowing, wow, I might be, something about me might be waiting to come into existence
Mm-hmm.
with the right friend. And, you know, as I think about, you know, even our relationship, Grace, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
there's certain things when I reflect on my friends, I'm like, wow, that part of me really only shines when I'm with that person or that person, you know? So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a beautiful thing. I think a second thing, at least in my mind, would be the gift of friendship is that they're a gift of grace to us.
Mm-hmm.
They see us sometimes at our worst. I was thinking Ralph Waldo Emerson said it's one of the blessings of old friends that you can be afford to be stupid with them. And Lawrence
Yes.
Peters says you can always tell a real friend when you've made a fool of yourself, they don't feel you've done a permanent job. And that I think is the mark of a true friendship. They can see you at
Mm-hmm.
your worst and still go, hey, love you, I'm with you. I know that that episode or whatever it was isn't the totality
Mm-hmm.
of you. So those are the first things that come to my mind, that our friends call us into existence and that they're relationships of grace and mercy. But
Mm-hmm.
can we talk about, Grace, why it might feel hard for some people to make friendships? One of the things that I encounter a lot in my line of work is people saying that they're lonely. And I wonder if maybe you could tell us a few factors that play into why friendships fail, or maybe why people find it hard to make friends these days.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brad. First, I do want to say I love those quotes too. I
Mm,
mean, trust me, I can think of foolish things I've said or done in the past, and my true friends have given me so much grace and mercy,
hmm
and it's such a rich relationship. So, well, let's talk about some barriers to friendship. Well,
mm,
one, heartbreak or even trauma can be a barrier to friendship. The pain of
mm,
rejection and mistreatment can absolutely block people from wanting to be vulnerable and trying again.
right,
And so that could be a
right.
natural barrier to friendship. Not knowing what they're looking for or what they need. This is actually some work I do with folks in therapy. It's starting with what are the characteristics that make a good friend? You know, if
Mm,
you don't know what the destination is, you don't know what to pack in the suitcase. And so
mm,
the definition you've given previously is a great framework. And I work with folks in therapy to invite them to reflect deeper. I ask them to make a list of qualities that describe a friend. You know, so I'll hear
mm,
things like honest, trustworthy, reliable, mutual support, respect. These qualities are the compass that's going to guide your search for that
mm,
true intimate friendship. Another barrier to friendship is fitting in versus belonging. And this is a distinction made by Brené Brown. She
mm.
says, fitting in is becoming who you think you need to be in order to be accepted.
Wow.
Belonging is being your authentic self and knowing that no matter what happens, you belong to you.
Mm,
And I think that can be a barrier to friendship for folks. Folks are trying to mold themselves into what they think this person wants or this group wants. And the thing is, if you're not showing up as your true self, who are you befriending? Who are they
mm,
befriending? You know, I struggled with creating true friendships probably from kindergarten to grade 6. And
mm,
something my mom told me was a game changer. She said, Grace, you can't please everybody.
mm.
She gave me permission to be myself, and people could accept me or not. And that was powerful. That was the
Right.
budding years of my people pleasing tendencies. And honestly, despite a few setbacks in the past, that continues to be my mantra to help me stay true to myself. If you aren't your authentic self, then who are they actually befriending?
Mm, mm,
The one more barrier I want to share to friendship is something Tyler Perry actually has a video where he describes people as parts of a tree. People can be leaf, branches, or roots.
mm.
Leaf people are fair weather, right? They're only there when it's sunny and it's fun. They're your hike
That's
people.
good.
Okay.
Yes.
Branches, they're a bit sturdier, but with enough pressure, they're gone. They can't hold the
Mm,
weight. Root
mm,
people are strong, they're sturdy, they can withstand the storms of life. They
mm.
provide stability and shelter. How does this become a challenge or a barrier to friendship? Well, the challenge is if you're trying to have leaf people be root people, it's not going to work, right? Another challenge is not knowing what season a friendship is in. Okay. Just like we've moved from spring into summer and then eventually we're going to be fall and winter. I know we don't want to talk about it, but, leaves aren't clinging to the tree. They know that they have to release in order for winter to have that resting period for spring to come. And so relationships are also seasonal at times. And so we got to know what season we're in and radically accept that, yes, there's going to be grief and loss, but holding on is going to lead to suffering because it doesn't fit anymore. So those are some of the barriers to friendship that I've discovered.
I love that tree metaphor. In fact, I think that would make a great exercise for people. If you're thinking about relationships, to maybe start cataloging who do you consider those root friendships, branch and leaves ones. And yeah, I think that's a really helpful. I love that metaphor because you're right. They're gone the moment the weather changes, things get windy, a little cold, they're gone.
And it's not a judgment, it's a reality, right? People serve different purposes in our lives. And if a person in our life is a leaf person, that's all they can be. They can't be what they are not. And so sometimes we get hurt or get disappointed because we have an unrealistic expectation. And we're looking about friendship on the ladder, always wanting to move up, up, up. The idea is to be looking for those root people who are going to have that longevity through the different seasons of life.
Yeah, and we've talked so much, Grace, about how boundaries and in relationships. The reality is we cannot be a root friend to everyone. In fact, if you try to be a root friend to everyone, you're going to end up being a leaf friend to everyone because there's only so much energy to go around. So and I think maybe even expectations, which we've talked about a lot, if we can balance our expectations and say, you know what, I don't have the history with this person, they're a leaf or a branch person, maybe it can relieve my pressure on them so I'm less disappointed if they're not as solid as I thought they were. I just think that's a really helpful way for us to start thinking about friendships.
So what about you, Brad? What do you think are some key ingredients to friendship? I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I've got four, so feel free to hop in at any time, right? Because I think, you mentioned whenever you ask people what they value in a friend, think honesty, trust, that comes up. So yes, I take those for granted. Of course, we want that. But there's some unspoken ingredients that I think are really important for friendship. The first would be friends who are playful. I think a lot of times we can get caught in such a why so serious, right? Everything's always serious and everything's always important. And speaking of mom wisdom there, I remember one of the things my mom used to tell me was it's important to be able to laugh at yourself. Like, don't take yourself too seriously. And I think in a group of friends, that's just really important. And I'm reflecting right now on how I think the work we do on ourselves will really determine what kind of friend we are. So I was with a group of friends, right? Got to tell you this story. And one person, it just came out that one person had an impression that they could do of all of us. You do an impression of someone, it's a little exaggerated there. So I was all for it. I'm like, oh, cool. Let's see an impression of me. But one person in the group before we got started stopped and said, I can't handle seeing an impression of myself. So can we please not do this? And, it sort of sucked the wind out of the room, but there was a learning opportunity for me there because I thought, wow, here's somebody who's fragile, and that's fair, but there's some work that needs to be done there because when people feel like they're on eggshells all the time with you, it doesn't leave a lot of room for playful banter and fun. And when we're that kind of person, I think others can see us as a bit boring. Maybe we're an energy sucker. We're a bit draining. And it doesn't mean that you got to be a stand-up comedian. You don't need to be funny all the time. But I think playfulness in friendship is one of those ingredients that we might not say right off the top of our head. Like, yeah, we want them to be honest and trusting. but I think playfulness is
I would
actually a
agree.
really important ingredient. Yeah.
Absolutely, I'd agree.
The second one I've got, now I'm curious what you think of this, Grace. Friendships must be reciprocal. And I'll give you a little story on how early COVID, this was right before apparently we all decided Zoom was the the video conferencing we were going to use. Zoom was
Mhm.
it. So we were playing around early COVID days with this, different platforms, and I can't remember what this one was called, but it was on with a group of friends. I think it was called Jitsu or something like that, a video
Mhm.
platforming thing. But what this one did is it timed how much everyone spoke. So if you and I were
Mm.
talking right now, we could see on the screen Brad's been talking for 20 minutes, Grace only 10.
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
had this fascinating effect on the group because suddenly everyone was hyper aware of how much oxygen they were sucking up in the group. And it had a weird balancing act. It made things a little stiff, but you could see people go, "Oh, my story's going too long. I need to cut
Mhm.
it." You could watch all this happen in real time. Now, maybe
Mhm.
that's why this platform didn't make it. But I think in friendships, there is something about being reciprocal, that
Mhm.
this is a back and forth thing. And I'm actually curious about this with you, Grace, because I wonder sometimes if friends try to make other friends their therapists, and sometimes that can get draining on people.
Absolutely.
I'm positive you have thoughts on this.
I'm gonna hail back to one of the rungs in your ladder is
Mm,
relationships don't have a hierarchy. And
mm,
if friendships aren't reciprocal, it can absolutely move into that hierarchy in terms of almost like a power imbalance. Because if
right.
you're the friend that is always in need, right, that means the
Mm,
other friend or friends are the ones who don't need. Right? And people
right.
don't like to be in relationship unless it's like a paid therapeutic relationship or mentor where that is defined. People don't like to be in a relationship where they're the only ones being vulnerable. And so
Mm.
I agree with you. Friendship has to be reciprocal in terms of fun, in terms of playfulness, in terms of intimacy. There has to be a mutual give and take for sure.
Yeah, and it makes me curious because of course we want to be able to share our hardships, our needs with our friends,
Mhm,
but I
mhm,
do think there is a place to say what I need right now in life is an hour to just spew some
mhm,
stuff and have somebody listen. And I don't know if we should always assume that our friends should bear that load. This is another
mhm.
plug here for therapy, Grace.
Yeah.
That sometimes what we need is the paid professional. I think it can be taxing on relationships when it,
Mhm,
like you said, when that hierarchy gets out of order. So, even on a more simple level, I tried with a group of pastor friends timed conversations because we see each other so regularly. It wasn't stiff or rigid. But what tends to happen is with certain personalities, and we pastors are the worst at it, is you can just suck up all that. You get together one night every 6 months and one
mhm,
person ends up talking the whole time and you go, I missed something there. It was
mhm.
just a helpful thing to be mindful of, making sure I'm asking questions as well as sharing
Mhm,
myself. So yeah,
mhm.
reciprocal is good. A third one I'll share with you, and it's just a quote, and I thought it was fantastic, or at least brought up something that I found interesting by Francine Duplessis Gray. Man, I'm the worst at pronouncing names, Grace, but she describes friendship as the beautiful enemy. I want to know what you think of this. She says, in a world more and more polluted by the lying of politicians, the illusions of the media, I occasionally crave to hear and tell the truth.
Mm,
To borrow a beautiful phrase from Friedrich Nietzsche, I look upon my friend as the beautiful enemy who alone is able to offer me total candor. Friendship is, by its very nature, freer of deceit than any other relationship we can know because it is the bond least affected by striving for power, physical pleasure, or material profit, most liberated from any oath of duty or constancy.
mhm,
I
mhm,
found that intriguing because as we've come through marriage and long-term relationships, there's a lot, there's power,
mhm,
there's physical pleasure involved. I like
mhm,
that she speaks of friendship as being freer from deceit than any other relationship. But what do you
mhm.
think of that?
It's almost like a juxtaposition, the beautiful enemy.
Mm,
To me, that speaks of not only the richness of friendship, but the genuineness of friendship. the truth
Mm.
telling of a friendship. A true
Mm-hmm.
friend will tell you if you've got something stuck between your teeth.
Yes.
A true friend will tell you about your blind spots with love and care, right? Because
Mm.
they want your
Mm.
greater good, as you said earlier, bringing out the best in us. I love that beautiful enemy. And that speaks to me
Mm.
of genuine long-term friendship. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that, Grace. I'll puff you up a little bit here because you've always done this. We have a long relationship together. And
Mhm.
sometimes when we think of a truth teller, it feels painful. It's like that friend who's going to tell you some real hard truth. But what I've always found with you and my best of friends that I have is sometimes it's actually just the right question. It doesn't need to
Mhm.
be, hey, Brad, you're doing this. This is not good. Fix that up. Sometimes it can be the right question at the right time, a question that's, a bit loaded to
Mhm.
make you think. And all of my
Yes.
friends over the years can ask perfect questions that get you thinking and maybe help you discover on your own there's maybe some
Mhm.
truth that we need to encounter. So I'd say with friendships, it doesn't need to be, we don't need to imagine it as always harsh, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, you have
Mhm.
something stuck in your teeth, like that sort of thing. But
Mhm.
yeah.
It reminds me of that scripture, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Like there's that
Mm.
again, that juxtaposition of, this is an intimate relationship and they're not always going to be, hype people where it's like, ooh, 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 they're
Yeah.
going to say, you know what? I love that about you, but here's an area that may be potential for growth. And again,
Mm.
not in a cutting down critical sort of way, but you know what? I love you and I know there's a better part of yourself waiting to be. And so I love
Mm.
that. I love that quote and that concept.
Yeah, and it speaks to you can't just go there with anyone. Like there needs to be a trust, I think, that
Yes.
hey, even if I ignore their advice and keep doing something silly, I know they're the kind of friend that has my back. It's way easier to
Mm-hmm.
hear that from that kind of friend, knowing they've
Mm-hmm.
got your back no matter what. So the final thing I think I would say is um, I've come to think of friendships as crock pots rather than microwaves. Like you can't just fry up a friendship real quick. And it takes time. It takes some
Yes.
simmering. And ultimately, in my head, I've come to think of it as time plus shared experiences. The more you experience together, the more time you have together. That's the
Mm-hmm.
recipe for a friendship coming together. But I think in our time, there's a desire maybe for everything quick, right? Like, can I cook up a best friend real quick here? And I'm like, that
Mm-hmm.
just
Just
isn't
doesn't work.
possible.
Mm-mm.
No.
I like that metaphor as well. It takes time, it takes multiple ingredients, and that soaking and marinating together turns into this beautiful richness, right?
Mm,
Yeah, you can get some sustenance from a microwave, but
absolutely.
it's not going to be a hearty stew.
Right, right, right. Okay, well, let me ask you one final question here, Grace. What are some practical ways we can start to become better friends? Are there ways that you might, in your practice, say, counsel folks to improve their friendship skills?
Mm-hmm. It starts with identifying what is it you want and need in a friendship. And then, like you said, it's going to take time, intention, consistency. And a few final thoughts is allow yourself to be vulnerable, right?
Hmm.
We are created for community. So we got to be brave and we got to seek out relationships that align with your values. That's again, knowing what you want and what you need. And then be open to be change agents in relationships, we have an opportunity to grow, and with intentionality, we can grow together.
Hmm.
I think it's important for honesty, ongoing communication about what is changing. You are not the same person of the past, and so it's expected that your needs are going to change. And friendships and friends can evolve over time. So knowing
Hmm.
that is really important. And then finally, communication is always key.
Hmm.
Healthy boundaries are necessary. Be brave to discuss the things that are not going well and absolutely celebrate what is going well. And
Hmm.
above all, have fun. Life is
Yeah.
short. Life is
Right.
short. So have fun in there. It's not all navel gazing and introspection, right? It's okay to
Mm.
let your hair down and have some fun as well. And all of that are beautiful ingredients for a long term friendship.
Mm. That's fantastic, Grace. And yeah, an important last word there. Be willing to laugh together, have some fun. It's the richness, the wine of life friendship is. So thank
Absolutely.
you, Grace, as always, for your wisdom. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, my friend Brad. You alluded to a long-term friendship we've had together, and it's been very rich. And it's rich to join you on the sacred sofa on this journey. That's just another manifestation of the values that align within our friendship. And I appreciate you. I want to take this moment to say I appreciate you and our friendship.
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate you as well. And it's been fun doing this together, and I'm looking forward to carrying on. So, with that, I think we'll say goodbye to each other and our listeners. Take care, Grace.
Take care.